Your local radio station.
Senedd Talk Radio.
It's Friday, May the 7th. Welcome along to our coverage of the Senedd Elections 2021. Joining me in the studio today is Gwenoro Jones, former MP for Carmarthenshire and our political analyst. We'll be bringing you all the results as they come in, along with interviews with the candidates involved in the election process.
Your stories, your platform. This is Senedd Talk Radio.
Welcome along. My name's Alan Evans. This is Senedd Talk Radio. Welcome back. That was Bruce Hornsby in the range and the way it is. We have on the line Peter Black, the former Lord Mayor of Swansea and a member of the Senedd for many years as well. Very experienced politician. Welcome along, Peter.
Thank you.
Just looking at the way things are at the moment across Wales, we're seeing a sort of a COVID climate where we've had a lot of businesses really facing rack and ruin. The economy is in a sort of downward spiral. Town centres, we're seeing lots of businesses closing now. Will they reopen again? That's the question. Looking at Swansea, I know there's a lot going on there. Are you optimistic, having been involved in local government for so long, that Swansea can sort of come out of this and get back to normal?
I'm not really sure what normal means, to be honest. I think the problem we're going to have in Swansea is trying to resurrect the city centre from the disastrous closures that's happened in the retail sector over the last year. We've lost Debenhams, which is a major source of attraction for shoppers in the city centre. We've lost Thornton's. We've lost a number of other retailers in the city centre. So we have to find a way of either resurrecting that or finding a new focus for the Swansea economy, to try to get people back in there, to try to get that demand up and get some more money coming into the city. So that I think is a big problem for us, and one which I'm not sure we have any answers to at the moment.
And do you think that, politicians, I am not sure what sort of side you're airing on here, whether it's Labour, Plaid Cymru or Conservatives, or are you of the mind that it doesn't matter? Would you rather see them working together so that, we don't have this kind of argy-bargy and nonsense going on, that really Wales is such a small place? Do we need these big divisions in politics? Shouldn't we just be electing a government, no matter who they are, and even if Labour get in, we should say, look, take notice of what Plaid is saying, take notice of what Conservatives are saying, because these are the public who have actually voted for these people as well. So they want their, opinions and their views and their issues sorted out.
Well, I, as a Liberal Democrat Assembly member for 17 years, I took part in a coalition as a Deputy Minister. The last term I was an Assembly member, I spent a large amount of time negotiating budgets with the then Labour government to try to get Liberal Democrat priorities through. So I've always been in favour of working together and parties cooperating to deliver benefits for the whole of Wales. And I think that's the key thing here is what can you deliver which is going to benefit the people of Wales, to make the Welsh Government and the Welsh and the Senedd work better and most effectively, and to carry forward the project which has been ongoing since 1999. But yeah, people do like parties, to see parties working together. But I'm a big student of the West Wing, and there's quite a famous or well-known passage in the West Wing where Bartlett explains I think he explains in one of the election debates that actually the American Constitution was set up for two opposing parties to oppose each other, because that's how politics should work. You've got to people need to have choices. And that applies to Wales just as much. People like to have choices when they go to vote. They like to see a difference in approach so they can choose which is the best one for them. and which best reflects their particular point of view. So you're always going to get some partisanship. You're always going to get people looking to parties to take a particularly distinctive stand. And we don't want to take that out of politics. That has to stay in politics. But once you're in there, once you're working in the Welsh Government and the Senedd, you do need to have people to deliver for Wales. And if you haven't got a majority, then you do, which is inevitable under the present system, then you do need to make sure that all the parties are working together, or at least some of the parties are working together to continue governing Wales effectively and to continue delivering benefits for the people of Wales. And so that's something which we're going to have to look for after the election. But once the election is on again, all bets are off and everyone's fighting as they would do, like two ferrets in a sack, unfortunately. But that's politics.
They are paid an awful lot of money, and there are some who are saying, look, we've, if nothing else, COVID has highlighted the inequalities in society, the amount of money politicians are paid, the amount of CEOs are paid, and so on. This hope that somehow, after the COVID, that there would be a fair deal for the NHS workers, for key workers, and all these kind of lowly paid people. Are you optimistic, or do you think that was just, it was sentimental, riding a crest of the sentimental wave and maybe looking for votes in the future? But once this is over, once they're back in, it's thank you very much. We'll take our big bucks and we will pay you what we pay you, which is pretty much pittance.
Well, I think there's more chance of that being delivered in Wales than this is on a UK level. Because I think that the politicians who are in the Senedd at the moment, who are going to be re-elected to the Senedd, have far more sympathy and understanding of what care workers and health workers have gone through and the sort of the very small rewards they get for that work. So I think there's clearly a need, a demand amongst those politicians to deliver. But at the end of the day, what it boils down to is how much money the Senedd and the Welsh Government have to deliver those changes. Because clearly they're reliant on a block grant from the UK government. And if they find the money to pay the health service workers more, if they find the money to pay social care workers more, then other things have to suffer. But I think they have to find that money, because I think everybody expects that healthcare workers and social care workers are going to be rewarded not just for the work they've done during the pandemic, but for the work they do on a day-by-day basis, pandemic or no pandemic, where they're very much under-remunerated and where they're not getting paid their worth. And I think that we have a better chance of that being delivered through a devolved government in the Senedd than we have through the UK government, which does not seem sympathetic to that point of view at all. So I certainly hope that the politicians do put that down as a priority, and I hope they do look at delivering on that. And, if other things have to go by to deliver that, then so be it. But that is clearly a priority for me. It's certainly been a priority for the Liberal Democrats. I hope it's a priority for the parties which get elected following yesterday's elections.
OK, I'll hand you over to Gwenoro. He wants to ask you a couple of questions as well.
Okay. Yeah, hi, Peter. You're OK?
Hi, Gwenoro. Yeah.
Nice to hear you talking about politics again.
I've never given up politics.
Well, no, I know.
I'm the council, and I'm chair of the scrutiny committee here.
Yeah, I know, but you've been, the Lord Mayor and all that, and you've called it a day from the Senedd. That's what I meant. More low key than you used to be. Further, how do you view the Lib Dem campaign in Wales?
I think the Liberal Dems had a very difficult job. I mean, they had a very poor result in 2016. I lost my seat. Other very good Liberal Democrats lost their seat then, largely because I think at that time people thought they were voting for Brexit because we were just a month away from that referendum. And we've struggled because of the aftermath of the coalition to come back from that very low point in 2015. And we're still struggling to do so. So I think that the party still has a lot of work and a lot of building to do. Having said that, I thought I was very on the plus side of the Liberal Democrat campaign this time. I was very pleased to see so many younger people coming forward, getting involved in that campaign, and the enthusiasm amongst the party members and the activists, I think gives us hope that there is a future for the Liberal Democrats in Wales. My only concern has been I thought that the campaign itself, the the slogan "putting recovery first" was a bit sort of vacuous and didn't really project a vision of what the Liberal Democrats believed. I think that's where we were lacking in this campaign. Is we didn't really have a vision which was going to grab people and say, yes, I want to see the Liberal Democrats in the Senate because they want to do that. All we were talking about was the recovery, and people do want a recovery being put first, but it didn't really distinguish us from anybody else. It didn't really say, this is what liberalism is about, this is what the Welsh Liberals would do in the Senate. It just talked about that, and I think that was a weakness in our campaign. But whether we win seats or not this time, the Welsh Liberal Democrats are not going away. They'll be back in local government elections next year. They'll be back at the next Senate elections in 5 years' time, and we will get seats then. So I'm optimistic for the future of the party. I just don't know how we're going to do this time.
Well, I was expecting you to say all that, Peter, because to be fair, it is the history, isn't it? It is the story, and it is accurate. It is a party, even before the Liberal Democrats, back in the 60s and the 70s, and I remember the Liberal Party. You know, it is a party that's committed, and it never gives up. So, what happens, you think, if, well, maybe Bill might win Brecon and Radnor? Is it then, if he loses, Jane has a chance for the regional seat? Is that how it goes?
Well, that's a possibility. We might get a regional seat in South Wales Central as well. It's really difficult. The regional seats are so difficult to call because we have to outpoll in particular, we have to outpoll the Abolish the Assembly Party, which I believe will have quite a strong following in Mid and West Wales. And we also have to poll enough to get to the threshold which is going to get us a seat. I have no indication at all as to how we're doing on the regional list. And the regional list in Mid and West Wales is particularly complex, of course, because it's such a mixed right bag of seats where you've got Labour seats, you've got Plaid Cymru seats, you've got Conservative seats. And how that falls out of the mix depends on what happens to the 4 regional seats in Mid and West Wales. It's much more straightforward in South Wales West, in Swansea and Bridgend and East Talbot where we are, simply because there are 7 Labour seats, so it's down to the opposition parties take the rest, if you like, the regional seats. The Mid and West Wales is really complex and difficult to predict. So I'm very hopeful that we will win if Brecon and Radnor. I'm hopeful that if we don't win Brecon and Radnor, we'll win a Mid and West Wales regional seat. I'm also hopeful that we might take a seat in South Wales Central, but at this stage, I have no idea how the things are going to fall out of the mix.
So you think
I don't think we're going to know for some time to come.
Yeah. You think it might be a couple of seats? One final thing. How do you explain, and I think it's good to ask you this, because you were in the Senedd for 16 years or whatever, something of that kind.
17 years.
17 years. An elder statesman, my friend, of the whole establishment. What is it about Abolish the Welsh Assembly that has captured so much attention? Is it a failing that the Senedd has failed to make an impact over 20 years? Or what is it about, do you think? What's your view on it?
It's a protest vote. It's appealing to those people who just want to, and I don't know if I can say this on them, who want to sod them all. They don't want anybody. The people who want to protest against things. But if you look at, I just can't see the appeal, because what they're basically saying is, let's give education and health back to the Tories. And I don't see anybody in Wales who actually wants to do that. But people are voting for the Abolish the Assembly because they're protesting. They're kicking against the establishment in the same way as they did in the Brexit referendum to a large extent. And that's why Abolish the Assembly have got the support they have. But it's not a huge support. I think we're still looking in single percentage figures. So, they're not anywhere near matching what UKIP did in 2016. And that gives me some hope, at least, that maybe we do have a chance of outpolling them.
Peter Black, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much for taking the time out to speak to us on the day that Wales finds out who they will elect as their Welsh government. Diolch yn fawr i chi gyd.
Thank you. Diolch yn fawr.
There we are, Bruce Hornsby on the range. On the phone with us is UKIP's Neil Hamilton. Welcome along, Neil.
Hi, Alan.
It's a big day. Wales decides, they've gone to the polls, albeit there was a bit of chaos, people queuing up and being turned away, some people unable to vote, so we've been told. Are you kind of happy that the democratic process has taken place? The candidate's been left off the polling papers in North Wales as well. What does it say about this organisation?
Well, that clearly is unacceptable. I didn't know anything about this until this morning, but it's inexplicable, actually. How can candidates be left off the ballot paper? You'd think, on the basis of that, the election would be invalidated and have to be run again.
People are saying still the polls are pointing towards abolished assembly, possibly replacing UKIP with the protest vote, really, and that this may be you out of a job, and that's the end of UKIP.
Well, I'd certainly regret it if I'm out of a job, as it were. I've enjoyed being in the Senedd in the last 5 years, and I think I've made a contribution which nobody else has made. I've been somebody that's stirred things up, and I've been a voice for people who otherwise would not have been heard. But ultimately, our bosses are the electorate, and they will decide. You can't really tell much from opinion polls about abolish the Welsh Assembly. The only poll that has consistently shown them as being very successful is YouGov. The other polls have said different things. The BBC's ICM poll said that they would get no seats, but we would get one. There was another poll as well by Opinion, which said the same, that we would get a seat, but Abolish would get none. Clearly, this is a very different election from 5 years ago, because that was immediately before the Brexit referendum. Remember, the Assembly election was in May, the Brexit referendum was in June. So UKIP obviously then enjoyed a massive publicity and a big bounce, because our unique selling point was we wanted to get Britain out of the EU, and without UKIP we wouldn't have had that referendum, nor indeed would we have got the leave vote. So, of course, I'm being realistic about this. We're not going to do anything like as well as we did 5 years ago. But because of the electoral system in Wales, it's very difficult to predict the regional seats where we're likely to be successful. We won't win any seats on the first past the post constituency section, but we could win seats at the regional level on as little as 6% of the vote. It depends how the vote's split amongst the other parties, so every region will have slightly different characteristics. So it's not possible to say as yet anything, of course. I've just had reports in from Torvine that they're only halfway through verifying the ballot papers. So no constituency will even have started to count the votes for the individual parties as yet. And yet we're going into the afternoon already. In Scotland, they're actually declaring results. So I don't know what's happening in Wales. Why are we so dozy and slow?
Do you think, I spoke to Mark Drakeford, I remember speaking to him prior to the election and saying, look, shouldn't you really be considering online voting? Shouldn't you be considering extending the period of the voting to avoid this queues that we've seen and people unable to vote? That hasn't happened. We've just gone ahead. Apart from, you can't go to the count. Not as many people can go to the count. The media have been told we have to disinfect our equipment, wear our masks at all time, take breaks, do all this kind of thing. So, are you worried about the scrutiny, of within the sort of process?
This is all absolute nonsense, isn't it? COVID hysteria. There were no deaths from COVID in Wales yesterday, as I understand it. None. Zero. And yet we're still behaving as though the Black Death is around the corner. For months now, we could have been living under a much lighter regime than the government has insisted we endure. And as you know, all along, I've been a sceptic about the form of regulation governments have introduced, not just in Cardiff, but also at Westminster, as being a huge overreaction to the COVID crisis and pandemic, and wholly disproportionate in many respects to the risk. Why do school children have to wear masks, for example? We know that school children are almost zero risk of catching COVID or suffering any ill effects from it. So there are all sorts of idiocies which this story that you've just mentioned about the slowness of the election count is a further illustration of it. And I'm told that this count could go into tomorrow.
That's right, yeah.
certainly the regional count, it seems to me, is bound to go into tomorrow. If, again, I've been told that in some constituencies in the valleys, the only ones I've heard from, they may be knocking off at 5 o'clock and then starting again in the morning. This is an election for the Welsh Parliament, as a result of which the Welsh government will be formed or not, as the case may be. There doesn't seem to be much sense of priority or urgency about this, but there jolly well should be.
You described the Senedd as a place that's corrupt, full of corrupt politicians. You've described it as a cartel. It doesn't instill the young people, the 16-year-olds, in much confidence if that's what a politician that's been there within that institution is saying about it. Are there any positive messages you can give, maybe just as your last hurrahs, you're leaving if you do leave?
Yeah, when I describe it as a corrupt institution, I don't mean that people are lining their own pockets by making decisions corruptly. What I mean is that because Wales is effectively a one-party state, and we've never had anything other than a Labour government since devolution started over 20 years ago, occasionally propped up by Plaid Cymru or as in the last Senedd, by the Liberal Democrats, then there's developed in Wales an atmosphere of cronyism and deference towards the government of the day, which I think is extremely unhealthy. And which is one of the major reasons why I think that devolution has failed and is bound to fail, because if we're bound to live under a permanent Labour government, then apart from the deficiencies of their own policies and political outlook, the whole political system becomes skewed in a way which I think is very, very unhealthy. And so that's why I fought this election on the basis of a new devolution settlement, getting rid of the Senedd and transferring power from politicians in Cardiff Bay to the elected health board and giving more power to schools councils to take decisions about how schools are run and how children are taught, instead of having everything decided by the Minister of Education or the Minister of Health in Cardiff. And maybe that way we'll get more pluralism into the system, the political system in Wales, and it'll be a healthier system. The
one thing people will be watching really when they go back, depending on who's in government, who is elected, the one thing people will be wanting and watching is, will they make good on their kind of hot air about egalitarianism, equality, paying those people on the coalface a really decent wage, pumping up the money they get as compared to what they're getting. Sian Cayac of Gwlad has said she will only take £29,000 out of a possible £60,000 of a wage if she's elected. She'll give the rest, donate the rest to local charities and local causes. Are you being paid too much, Neil? Have you been paid too much as a member of the Senedd?
Well, I think that Senedd members are paid a reasonable amount of money. It's a fortune for many people, obviously. But compared with what parliamentarians are paid across the board, I don't think that the salaries of Senedd members are very out of line. Having said that, I don't think we need to pay any Senedd members. So we shouldn't have any Senedd members, because the Senedd is a useless institution in terms of providing any kind of democratic control on the government. And you can't have proper debates there either, because we sit for 2 afternoons a week in plenary session, and you're limited to sort of 3 minutes to make a speech, or sometimes 90 seconds. So it's a joke institution, actually, because of the way it's run, and it's a toothless poodle in terms of imposing any kind of control on the government. And compared with Westminster, it's a toy town institution, which is totally ineffectual. So, mind you, Westminster isn't what it was either. But I do think that if we're going to have a Senedd in Wales, it ought to provide some kind of proper reasoned debate rather than just the odd soundbite. We have endless statements by the government, which is just a propaganda exercise for them, often highly repetitious, and most of what we do in the Senedd, in practical terms, does it benefit people's lives? No, it doesn't. It makes no difference at all. So, why should the Welsh public pay for an institution that simply doesn't work and, in my opinion, can't work?
Well, there's a lot in there, but I mean, you fought very hard to take us out of Europe. You're now saying that we don't need a powerhouse in Cardiff that represents the people of Wales specifically for devolution. You think it's as you say, it's a puppet, a weak link in the chain, and so on. Adam Price, Plaid Cymru, their call is for independence. Do you think that's a way forward? Then can we do that? And is that the solution to Wales's problems? That we just say, look, we don't need you in Westminster there. We'll find our own way. We've got the resources. We've got the people. Yes, it may take some years. It may take some time. But it might be better, as you say, than being the poodle to Westminster.
Well, I mean, it's a romantic fantasy, political independence for Wales. Government at all levels spends about £40 billion a year in Wales, but we can only raise £25 billion from Welsh taxes. So there's a £15 billion a year gap between what government spends and what Welsh taxes will raise. That difference is made up by, broadly speaking, the taxpayers of London and the southeast of England. That's true, by the way, of the north of England, northwest of England, southwest of England as well. London and the southeast pay for the regions of England just as they pay for Scotland and Wales's deficits. And that's why devolution can never work properly, because you're dependent ultimately upon decisions that are made by the Chancellor of the Exchequer at Westminster, and that's a different electoral mechanism and different elected institution. And so Plaid Cymru's idea of independence for Wales is nonsensical, actually, because if they did suddenly get independence for Wales, first of all, they'd have to find a £15 billion funding gap and how to fill that. That would mean a massive reduction in public spending if they were to become independent, or an impossibly large increase in taxes. Doubling of income tax, for example, for ordinary people. I don't think anybody has really thought this through at all. They can't tell us what the currency of Wales is going to be if it becomes politically independent. If they retain the pound, then the Bank of England will decide Wales's monetary policy. What sort of independence is that?
You don't.
Another thing is nonsense.
You don't approve of the European Parliament. You don't approve of the Welsh Assembly. I'm guessing now is Westminster's next on your hit list. Are you considering changing your name by default to Guy Fawkes?
Well, it's been said that Guy Fawkes is the only man ever to enter Parliament with good intentions. I don't obviously believe that. A lot of people in politics, and a lot of people even in the Senedd in Cardiff, obviously go into politics with the best of intentions. But we know the path to hell is paved with them. And so it has proved to be in Wales throughout my lifetime. I don't say that devolution can't work in any circumstances, but I do say it can't work in the circumstances of Wales in the modern age in which we live, for the reasons that I've set out earlier on. There's a lot wrong with Westminster too. Don't get me wrong. I don't think that's a perfect institution by any means. But it's better, I think, that we keep the United Kingdom together. And the creation of devolved institutions has actually tended to create tensions which are pulling us apart. We see that most dramatically in Scotland, but we also see it developing in Wales. In advance of this Senedd election, Mark Drake had said the United Kingdom is over, whatever that means, and that's all part of him trying to cozy up to Plaid Cymru, because he knows he won't be getting a majority of Labour members elected today, and so he'll have to do a deal with Plaid Cymru. Plaid Cymru will always do a deal with Labour. They'll never do a deal with the Tories, so they'll preserve the same sort of political corrupt system that we've got. And as Leighton Andrews said before the last Senedd, they're a cheap date, so they don't extract a very high price for their support. The DUP in Northern Ireland got an extra £1 billion out of Theresa May for supporting the Conservative government in Westminster over Brexit. Mark Drakeford and Carwyn Jones got absolutely nothing, zilch, because of their grandstanding about a second referendum and being against Brexit and so on and so forth. You know, that's the trouble with politicians in Cardiff Bay. They're more interested in playground games than in doing things which are going to be of practical benefit to the Welsh people.
Okay, well, Neil Hamilton, it's been a pleasure speaking to you. I'm sure we will be hearing more from you later in the day as the results come in, and you know, as the polls predict that UKIP won't get a seat. We'll see if that bears fruit for people.
Well, some polls predict that we will do, so we'll see.
Some polls do, yeah, they do. Okay, then. Well, I'll speak to you again. Many thanks for speaking to us.
Okay, thanks.
Diolch yn fawr i chi. Ta.
Your local radio station.
We are Senedd Talk Radio.